The Zor'Khan Empire was feared across the galaxy. They didn't just conquer planets, they erased civilizations. Their fleets, massive and unstoppable, swallowed entire star systems in their wake. No empire had ever survived their wrath, no military force had ever matched their strength. Then, one day, their grandest fleet, a war armada of 600 ships, the most powerful force ever assembled, vanished. No distress signals, no wreckage, no trace. It was as if the entire fleet had been plucked from reality. The Zor'Khan, paralyzed by confusion and fear, scoured the stars for centuries, searching for any sign of their missing warships. They never found it. Until now. The crew of the exploration vessel Viren's Echo had not expected to find anything unusual. They were a scientific expedition, tasked with charting the fringes of deep space where no intelligent species had ever dared to settle. For months, they drifted through the vast emptiness, scanning distant systems, logging celestial anomalies. Then, their sensors picked up something impossible. A fleet. Perfectly intact. 600 Zor'Khan warships resting in the orbit of a desolate, unnamed world. A fleet that should not exist. A fleet that had been missing for centuries. A fleet that, by all logic, should have been decayed, stripped for parts, or long since destroyed. Yet, there it was, fully operational, shielded, armed, ready. And then came the final horror. Their scanners detected life signs aboard the warships, but they weren't Zor'Khan. They were human. The bridge of the Viren's Echo descended into chaos. The crew, a mix of Varnax, Thalran, and Xarxi scientists, stared in silent horror at the data before them. "This isn't possible," gasped Lirvek, the ship's communications officer. His iridescent scales dimmed with shock as he flicked through the readings. This fleet was lost before humans even developed interstellar travel. "And yet," Captain Kessa Vurak murmured, gripping the console tightly, "they're sitting inside those warships right now." A deep silence settled over the crew. Then, a nervous Thalran scientist spoke up. "How?" No one had an answer, because it was impossible. 600 Zor'Khan warships didn't just get stolen, and yet, somehow the humans had done it. But that wasn't the most disturbing question. The real question was, what were they planning to do with it? Before the crew could even process the insanity of the situation, their communication panel crackled to life. An incoming transmission, from the fleet, from the humans. The bridge fell deathly silent. Captain Vurak hesitated before pressing the accept button. A holographic image appeared on the bridge. A human, not a soldier, not a pirate, not a desperate survivor. A man in a worn leather jacket, leaning casually against the control panel of a Zor'Khan warship, a steaming cup of coffee in one hand. He grinned. "Took you guys long enough to find us." The crew of the Viren's Echo stared in stunned silence. The human tilted his head. "Oh, you're wondering how we got all these ships?" He took a slow sip of his coffee, as if he had all the time in the universe. Then he smiled. "Well, that's a fun story." The crew of the Viren's Echo had no idea what they had just uncovered. This wasn't just a missing fleet. This wasn't just an impossible heist. This was a declaration. The greatest armada in galactic history, stolen right from under its owners, by a species that wasn't even supposed to be capable of it. And if humans were capable of stealing an entire fleet, what else were they capable of? For several seconds, no one on the bridge of the Viren's Echo spoke. The human on the screen just smiled, sipping his coffee as if he hadn't just shattered centuries of unanswered questions. Captain Kessa Vurak's claws tapped the control panel, her mind racing. This was a trap. It had to be. "Who are you?" she demanded. The human set his cup down with a mockingly slow motion, stretching his arms. "Captain Adrian Hale. Nice to meet you." He gestured behind him, and the crew could now see the interior of the ship, Zor'Khan technology, but modified, humanized. And yet, everything was fully functional. Lirvek, the communications officer, leaned toward the captain. This has to be a deception. Zor'Khan warships are genetically locked. No one else can fly them. Hale grinned wider. Yeah, they said that too. Silence. Captain Vurak narrowed her amber eyes, folding her arms. Where is the original Zor'Khan crew? Hale raised an eyebrow. Don't know. They left. Or maybe they never made it here. That's impossible. He shrugged. That's what they thought too. The Viren's echo scanned the fleet for damage, wreckage, anything that suggested a battle had taken place. There was nothing. Not a single blaster mark. No signs of forced entry. No distress calls. The Zor'Khan ships had not been taken by force. It was as if their original crew had simply vanished, leaving the ships perfectly intact, and then humans had just walked in and taken them. But how? And more importantly, why? Captain Vurak wasn't the only one who had seen the fleet. The moment the Viren's echo had scanned the system, the data had been transmitted back to the Galactic Survey Initiative. Within hours, the discovery had spread to governments, war councils, and intelligence agencies, and the reaction was immediate. The missing Zor'Khan fleet has been found. Humans have it. No one knows how. Across the stars, leaders gathered in urgent meetings, panicked whispers spreading like wildfire. The implications were terrifying. Humans were not a major power. Humans did not have the fleet strength to rival galactic empires. Humans did not have the technology to crack Zor'Khan warships. And yet, they now possessed the most powerful armada in history. Speculation ran wild. Theories emerged. Did they hijack the ships? Did they kill the Zor'Khan crew? Did the Zor'Khan give it to them? But none of these made sense. The Zor'Khan had never surrendered in their history. The ships showed no damage, no signs of hacking, no distress calls, and there was no known technology in existence that could override Zor'Khan's security. It wasn't just that the humans had stolen the fleet. It was that no one could figure out how they had done it, and that made them dangerous. Back aboard the Viren's Echo, Captain Vurak gritted her teeth. She needed answers. You expect us to believe that 600 Zor'Khan warships simply fell into human hands? Hale grinned. Well, I could tell you the truth, but you wouldn't believe me. The way he said it sent a chill through the crew. Learvek muttered, He's enjoying this. Vurak narrowed her eyes. And what exactly do you plan to do with them? For the first time, Hale's expression changed. The casual grin faded. He leaned forward slightly, and for a brief second, Captain Vurak saw something that unnerved her more than anything else. He wasn't joking anymore. Let's just say, Hale murmured, there's a reason we haven't given them back. The transmission cut. The Viren's Echo was left in absolute silence. Captain Vurak took a slow, steady breath. Her claws tightened into fists. They needed to get this information back to the Galactic Council, because one thing was clear. The humans had the fleet. No one knew how, and they weren't planning on returning it. The Viren's Echo had uncovered something monumental. 600 Zor'Khan warships, fully intact, fully operational, in human hands. The shock of the discovery had already begun rippling across the galaxy. Governments were scrambling. War councils were panicking. Intelligence agencies were trying and failing to piece together the impossible. And amidst all of this, the humans remained silent. They did not acknowledge the fleet. They did not issue demands. They did not threaten anyone. They simply existed. And somehow, that was even worse. Within 24 hours, a priority-level emergency session was called in the Galactic Council. Representatives from every major empire, from the warlike Threx Dominion to the bureaucratic Varnax Union, were present. The atmosphere was thick with anxiety. A towering Zelvari general, his chitinous exoskeleton gleaming under the chamber's dim lights, slammed his fist onto the table. This is unacceptable. How did a primitive species manage to hijack an entire war fleet? A Thalran diplomat, her serpentine body coiling with distress, hissed softly. That is what we are here to discuss. The holographic display in the center of the chamber flickered to life. Projected in glowing red was a single phrase: Fleet status, fully operational, human control confirmed. Murmurs spread like wildfire. Then, a deep voice cut through the noise. "We have two problems." All eyes turned to Grand Strategist Ruvak, a high-ranking Varnax intelligence officer. His voice was calm, calculated, cold. He raised two fingers. "First, we do not know how they took it." The chamber was silent, because that was the truth none of them wanted to admit. 600 Zor'Khan warships had not been hijacked. There was no evidence of hacking, no distress signals, no signs of battle. It was as if the fleet had simply been claimed. And if humans had found a way to do that once, who was to say they couldn't do it again? Ruvak lowered one finger. "Second, and more concerning, we do not know what they plan to do with it." A heavy silence fell over the chamber. That was the real terror. If humanity had declared war, at least there would be clarity. But instead, they had said nothing. They had taken the fleet, hidden it for centuries, and now, when the galaxy had finally found them, they still offered no explanations. A fleet is not stolen for no reason. A fleet is not maintained for centuries without purpose. And the longer humanity refused to explain, the more the galaxy feared the answer. The Galactic Council meeting was interrupted by a blaring alarm. A single unauthorized transmission had bypassed security. A hologram flickered to life in the center of the chamber. The room went deathly silent. It was a human, not a government official, not a diplomat, not a military leader, just a man, leaning casually against a control console, his expression one of pure amusement. "I see you guys finally noticed." Whispers rippled through the chamber. It was him, Captain Adrian Hale, the man who had spoken to the Viren's Echo, the man sitting aboard a Zor'Khan warship as if he owned the place. Grand Strategist Ruvak stood slowly. His voice was like steel. "What are you planning, human?" Hale tilted his head. "That's a good question. What do you think we're planning?" The room was silent, because the truth was, no one knew. Hale's smirk widened. "The real question isn't what we're planning." He leaned forward slightly, his voice dropping to a quiet murmur. "It's whether or not you're ready for it." The transmission cut. The chamber was left in absolute, suffocating silence, and across the galaxy, for the first time in centuries, no one felt safe. The Galactic Council chamber was dead silent. The human had vanished from the transmission, leaving nothing behind but cold, unspoken terror. For the first time, the most powerful beings in the galaxy weren't just uncertain. They were afraid. No empire had ever been able to hide a fleet of this scale. No species had ever stolen an armada without firing a shot. No civilization had ever been capable of keeping a secret this big, for centuries. And now, every leader in that room was asking themselves the same question. What were the humans waiting for? The moment the council meeting ended, the galaxy erupted into frenzied chaos. Every intelligence agency, every Black Ops division, every high-level spy network was given the same impossible order. Find out how humanity took the fleet. Find out what they are planning. Find out before it's too late. Hundreds of ships launched in every direction, following every scrap of data that could possibly lead to answers. Intercepted communications, old archives, even ancient human records, everything was suddenly being analyzed. But the deeper they looked, the less they found. There was no evidence of a battle, no Zor'Khan distress calls, no disruptions in the historical war records. It was as if the fleet had been gifted to them, or worse, as if the Zor'Khan never even realized it was missing. The Zor'Khan Empire, the most feared military force in the galaxy, had been silent for centuries after the disappearance of their fleet. But now they were waking up. Zor'Khan warlords, once confident in their unchallenged dominance, were now frantically mobilizing. Humans do not steal fleets. This is a deception. They must have found a way to reawaken an old war relic. No species could have done this without inside help. They didn't believe it. They didn't want to believe it. But deep in their command centers, where only the highest-ranked officers spoke in hushed, fearful tones, they knew. And so, every available Zor'Khan warship was now being deployed. Not to fight, not to conquer, but to find the missing fleet before it was too late. Because if humans had truly taken their greatest armada, and if they had held onto it for centuries without anyone noticing, what else were they hiding? Then, across the galaxy, every major communications network received an unexpected transmission. It was from the humans, not a threat, not a demand, not a declaration of war, just a single, chilling message. You lost something. We found it. It's ours now. Do not come looking. The galaxy froze. No further explanation. No follow-up broadcast. No visible fleet movement. Just that one statement. And yet, that was all it took to change everything. Back in the Galactic Council, panic had turned into desperation. If we let them keep it, they could become the most powerful force in the universe. If we provoke them, we risk making an enemy we do not understand. If they had the means to take it, what else do they have? For the first time in recorded history, no one wanted to push humanity, because humanity wasn't posturing. They weren't making demands. They weren't negotiating. They had just told the galaxy a simple truth, and that was more terrifying than any declaration of war. Humans didn't need to fight. They had already won, and no one had even realized it until now. The galaxy stood on a knife's edge. 600 Zor'Khan warships, gone for centuries, now in human hands, and no one knew how, but perhaps more terrifying, no one knew why. The Zor'Khan Empire was mobilizing, but for the first time in their brutal, war-driven history. They weren't launching an invasion. They weren't threatening retaliation. They weren't even demanding their fleet back. They were hesitating, because for the first time, the Zor'Khan had encountered something they didn't understand, something they couldn't fight, something that had stolen from them without leaving a trace. And deep down, in the war rooms of their highest command, a terrifying thought settled into their minds. What if humans could do this again? The Galactic Council was in absolute turmoil. For days, leaders of every species, every empire, every military power debated one question. Do we confront the humans? Some wanted action. We cannot let them keep this fleet. If they took these ships, they can take more. We should demand an explanation. No civilization can be allowed to wield that much power without oversight. Others were more cautious. If they've hidden it for this long, they've already outmaneuvered us. If we push them, what happens when they finally respond? The truth was undeniable. This wasn't about stolen ships anymore. This was about fear. Fear of what humanity had done. Fear of what humanity was capable of. Fear of what humanity might do next. And that fear was paralyzing. For weeks, the Zor'Khan military had remained uncharacteristically silent, but in the depths of their most secure war chambers, a plan was forming. We will not attack. We will not threaten. We will simply send a scout force. They didn't want a war. They just wanted to know. So they dispatched a single stealth vessel, its mission simple: find the fleet, observe from a distance, report back. The moment it arrived in the uncharted system where the fleet had been sighted, it vanished. No distress signal, no wreckage, no escape pods. Just gone. Just like their fleet. And that was the moment the Zor'Khan finally understood. This was not their war to fight. This was not a battle they could win, because the enemy had already won before they even knew they were playing. Hours after the Zor'Khan scout ship disappeared, a message was sent across the entire Galactic Council. It contained no threats, no declarations of war, no negotiations, just a single, quiet statement. Do not send another. And with that, the galaxy finally understood. The fleet was gone. The fleet was human now, and the humans were not going to explain themselves, because they didn't need to. From that day forward, An unspoken law spread across every major power in the universe. Do not provoke humanity. Do not question what they are capable of. And above all, do not ask about the fleet. Because the next time something disappeared, the galaxy knew. They wouldn't get a warning. They wouldn't get an explanation. It would just be gone, and no one would ever find it again.